Welcome everyone to our session 3, Zero Waste Advocacy in College. My name's Caleb and I'll be your moderator for this session. Stacy Lee is our tech host. The first presentation will be given by Maddie Wilson and Kyle Alves. Maddie is a fourth-year UCLA Environmental Science student involved with UCLA Sustainability. And Kyle is a Sustainability Reporting and Outreach Coordinator at UC Office of the President. Next up will be Young Grigoris, Campaign Director Post Landfill Action Network. And followed up by Sydney Perry, Senior at University of Arizona, studying environmental science. So Maddie and Wilson, I'll get your presentation queued up and you all can take it away here.
Perfect.
Yeah. 1 second. Great. Let me know when you want the slide changed as well.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, if we can get started. I want to start off the presentation with just a few questions for everyone here. First, have you ever had trouble sorting your waste? And second, have you ever not had access to recycling or composting? I'm pretty sure that would be everyone here, so I want to demonstrate that you aren't alone. At some point, we really want to explore these questions among many others in the context of the student perspective and then hope it informs future projects or work going forward. Next slide. So my name is Kyle Alves. I'm the Sustainability Reporting and Outreach Coordinator with the UC Office of the President.
My name is Maddie Wilson. I'm a fourth-year environmental science major at UCLA. And we conducted this research project through Sustainability Action Research last year. Sustainability Action Research is a program offered by UCLA and the Institute of Environment and Sustainability. And it's really about finding different areas which we can improve sustainability at UCLA and then creating a deliverable or an action item in order to help follow our sustainability goals. And so, yeah, we conducted this project from January to June of 2021, and we partnered with the UCLA Zero Waste Manager and 4 other UCLA students. Next slide, please. So this was the question we really wanted to address when conducting our research, and we wanted to know how can UCLA best implement a zero waste and single-use plastic ban that is inclusive to the entire UCLA population, so it really takes into account different majors and different experiences within zero waste. We also wanted to consider the habit and culture of waste. So although this was conducted during the pandemic, we really wanted to also address, how would we transition back into a post-pandemic situation when it comes to waste and cleanliness. And then finally, we also really wanted to make sure that any zero waste plan or single-use plastic ban was easily accessible and understandable to all UCLA students, and really took into account their different experiences within zero waste. Next slide, please.
So as with any proper research project, we started with formulating questions for what we want to find out about student perspectives and zero waste in general, but without coming at it from a biased point of view. We started with a general outline of insights we want from students. For example, how important do you think zero waste is? Or how far would you go to pick up trash that wasn't yours? And then we went through multiple rounds of edits from outside the team and other SAR students. Simultaneously, we also realized in order to collect this information, we need to compensate students properly for their time, and we approved grant funding for Visa gift cards that would act as incentives for students. We reached out to academic departments, student organizations, listservs, and even Greek Life to spread out the survey, and we received over 250 responses to the survey, which we were pretty proud about, and used this to identify main barriers and student perceptions to zero waste.
And along with actually, on the side, sorry about that.
No, sorry, that's my bad.
And so after we conducted our survey, we ended up doing focus groups. So this acted as more of an open-ended discussion for many students on this topic. And we also included incentives to compensate students for their time for their focus groups as well. And we really kept sessions small, so around 6 people. And we let them know that they're anonymous or that their responses were going to be completely anonymous, so that we had a very a comfortable and safe space so that students can share their honest replies. And at the end of it, we ended up doing an analysis. We grouped all the replies together in categories, and then ended up counting the frequency of those categories to determine, what are the great barriers that we're finding within zero waste. Next slide, please. Nevertheless, although our research ended up going really well, that didn't mean that we didn't end up facing a few challenges. So one of the first challenges we faced was really choosing a focus. We really wanted to focus on the beginning at staff, faculty, and students, but we realized given our time constraints, we really wanted to narrow a focus just on students. We also wanted to make sure that we avoided a bias, so we spent a lot of time refining and evaluating and having other people go over our research as well to make sure that we weren't biased within our research. And then finally, we also wanted to choose a toolkit format. So our final deliverable ended up being 2 toolkits to address both student behaviors. And then we also really wanted to address infrastructural change through the admin side. So that's ended up being 2 different deliverables that we created through this project. Next slide, please. Okay, and so getting into some key findings. So we ended up having 263 responses, and we had a lot of responses from a wide variety of majors and also different years. And one of the main ideas we found both in our survey and focus group sessions was that students are pretty unsure of how to sort their waste. And also students are really unsure of the UCLA current UCLA zero waste policies and the resources that already exist and that are available to them. So we found that students might lack this knowledge, but on the whole, they really do care about sustainability and want to know more about how to engage in zero waste, and also want to know more about the waste management process in general.
On the note of how to engage students, we investigated how they prefer to engage with information regarding it. And half of all students actually stated they preferred engagement through social media platforms, specifically Instagram, Facebook, and so on. And we asked participants there after, through our survey and focus groups, what programs they'd like to see from UCLA in order to help them remove barriers to zero waste. And a lot of the answers centered around a new zero waste toolkit for new students, zero waste included in new student orientation, and a lot of zero waste workshops throughout the year. Next slide. Before we do get into specifics of what we found, we're kind of curious about what you guys perceive it actually to be. So we're going to put out a poll in the chat. And look at that, Maddie polls. So this is going to be for slide 7. And we're curious, what do you believe the biggest barrier to be when it comes to compost and recycling?
We're also, because they're at the same time, we're also going to ask the second question. What aspect of your life do you think contributes to the most waste overall?
This might be a difficult question, but I guess we can get Caleb. When do you think the answers would have come in?
I'll wait till most people have answered. You're still coming in.
Definitely some interesting questions. Fantastic. Okay, awesome. Really, really interesting. It looks like most people said, I don't know how to start. Great answer. We'll get to the slide 9 right after. Next slide. So from the UCLA students we actually polled, the most common answer people stated were that zero waste options were not easily available or too inconvenient. So pretty similar lines. The second one was actually many households didn't have the proper zero waste infrastructure. And this was a bit present during the pandemic because a lot of students were at home. And again, this sort of is to reiterate, it's not that students aren't interested. In many ways, we just need to make it more accessible for them. Next slide.
Yeah, so we also asked what aspects of your life contribute to the most waste overall. It seemed like online orders and packaging were pretty big for this one, and also groceries and cooking. People also said water bottles. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so this is what we asked students in our survey as well. And from our study, we found that takeout and online orders and packaging were the biggest culprits, followed by groceries at number 3, and school supplies and water bottles weren't as big as a culprit when it comes to waste generation. And it really confirms what we already know about student lifestyle. And hopefully this information will really push departments like UCLA Dining to really further address waste in larger areas like takeout and also online orders. Next slide, please. So this also can we go to the next slide actually? Thank you. As we mentioned before, sustainability action research is really focused about creating a deliverable and assisting the administration in tackling zero waste barriers. And so we ended up making 3 different toolkits or 3 different deliverables. One was a zero waste toolkit for student use to really tackle behavioral changes. We also created informational graphics for student use to really tackle the common issues we found in our survey and focus groups. And then we also created a communications plan, and this was more for infrastructural change for the administration use. Next slide, please.
This is just a few examples of the graphics we made kind of for the communications and outreach portion. The first one that you can see, it really targets the misunderstandings of what the zero waste target for UCLA is, kind of going over the policies in an easy and digestible manner. The second one is more for UCLA specific habits and the culture that we wanted to sort of create around UCLA with waste and recycling. The third is probably one of the biggest misunderstandings. Even I was pretty didn't really understand it, was the recycling numbers. And hopefully this, and giving this to Kiki and moving forward, that UCLA will be able to utilize graphics like this to really get students to understand zero waste. Next slide.
And this is kind of a breakdown of what we ended up doing, both on the communication side and then also on the toolkit side, which was more for student use. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. Okay, perfect. And then we really just want to wrap up our presentation by asking, what can students do to engage others within zero waste? We found that students really like to engage with zero waste on social media, and it can be a great way to establish a zero waste culture and address common questions. We also really want to come at it from an equity, diversity, and inclusion perspective and understand that it may not be that students aren't interested in zero waste, but they might lack access to these zero waste resources. We also really want to understand key knowledge barriers like sorting and address those within our communications plan, and really keep in mind our audience and present information in a pleasing way and an understandable way for them to really target, what are these key issues that the audience is facing. With that being said, thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We hope you learned something interesting or got to reflect on your own zero waste habits, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And I guess we're going to be going into questions in a little bit, but yeah.
Hey, Caleb, you're on mute.
All right, great presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, it sounds like you both are getting some great action in the school system and really making some impact. So yeah, just wanted to remind everyone, we're going to be taking questions at the end, but feel free to leave some questions in the chat so you don't forget them, and then we can ask them. We'll start with those Maddie and Kyle's first, and then go on. Right now, it seems as Young, though Young is actually not with us right now. So we're going to skip their presentation for now and go to Sydney. So Sydney, if you are ready, I'm going to pull up your, oh, hold on one second. Sounds like maybe Stacy said, Stacy, do you feel like maybe Sydney or Young can go at the end? Okay, cool. Sorry. So yeah, we're going to just switch the order. Young will be going last. Sydney, you can go next. So if you're ready, I'll pull up your presentation here. Cool.
Alrighty. Hello, everybody. I am so happy to be here. And this is our presentation, Do the Rot Thing, Composting for Your Community. I think that pun was fantastic. All right, we can go on to the next slide. Perfect. And here's just a little presentation outline of what I'm going to talk about right now. So first I'm going to talk about who I work for, which is the Arizona Compost Cats and the Office of Sustainability at the University of Arizona, and then who I am. And then we're going to go into talking about composting, what is composting, and why should you compost? And then going into Let's Rot, how to begin a compost system wherever you are. And then Q&A will be at the end of this session. So next slide. Perfect about us, and we can move on. All right, so as I said, I work for the Arizona Compost Cats, and we're an organization that was founded in 2011, and we're one of the largest university-based and student-led composting organizations in the entire nation. Our mission is to reduce waste and greenhouse gas emissions, and we want to increase local food security and make great soil amendments. And over the past 10 years, we've diverted more than 20 million pounds of organic waste. And as you can see, this is a picture of my team. We've got about 12 people, and it's super fun. So we can go on. Perfect. And we also are housed under the Office of Sustainability at the University of Arizona. And the mission of our office is to accelerate institutional sustainability through interdisciplinary and collaborative solutions that are environmentally sound, socially just, and economically viable. And for me, I'm a compost cat. I've been a compost cat for about a year now. I am a compost specialist technically. That means I deal mostly with compost and I deal with education, social media, everything like that. And I am a senior right now, majoring in environmental science at the U of A. And we can move on. Perfect. Now we're going to talk about composting, my favorite thing to talk about. Oh, it got a little messed up, but for this quote, it says, you can go ahead. Perfect. It says over 50% of what we put into the landfill is compostable. So half of what we put into a landfill is actually compostable. We can compost it. And so according to the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, this is comprised of about 21% wasted compostable food scraps, 15% is paper and paperboard, 8% is about yard trimmings, and 8% is wood waste that we just throw away, and that could be composted and added back into our soil. All right, we can move on. So what is compost? Some of you may be asking. It's a bit of an elusive topic some of the time. So compost is a nutrient-rich soil amendment, and it can be used for soil health, water retention, and it gives a suitable environment for microbes and other beneficial organisms. And so what that means is that it helps plants grow better. Compost is part of a circular economy. So that means taking food waste or taking any kind of waste and putting it back into the earth instead of just letting it like sit in a landfill. That's the same thing with like recycling and anything like that. So it takes food waste and turns it into plantable soil. Whenever you compost, you take 1 part browns. That can be, that's your carbon source. So that's wood chips, leaves, straw, paper, if you can compost paper, and then 2 parts green, which is your nitrogen rich sources. So that's food waste, manure, yard clippings, anything like that. And then you add water and you add oxygen, and it creates compost in different amounts of times for different systems. And why should you compost? Why do you even care? It's a lot of work sometimes, but the decomposition of organic matter releases greenhouse gases most in landfills. And so when it's in landfills, it releases a lot of methane gas because it's decomposing in an anaerobic condition, and methane is one of the biggest greenhouse gases. So we want to reduce that. And when it decomposes in a compost system, it releases CO2, which is a lesser greenhouse gas, and it also goes back into the soil. So composting helps soils, it helps plants grow better, it helps retain moisture in soils. It also helps with soil integrity in places where maybe the soil integrity isn't so great, like where I am in Arizona. And then also from an environmental justice standpoint, around landfills, it is known that it is way worse living conditions than if it's not around landfills. So if we can decrease the amount of food waste, decrease the amount of need for landfills. That's kind of the whole zero waste idea, is that we don't want to be throwing things away that could be used in a different way. So, all right, and we can go to the next slide. So what can you compost? In general, you can compost fruits and veggies, coffee grounds, tea leaves, really anything that comes from the ground, you can put back into the ground. So pasta and grains, bread and pastries, obviously yard and garden trimmings, and eggshells. So those are generally always compostable. Sometimes in some areas you can compost paper and paperboard and things like that. But in some areas, like in our area, we don't have permits for it, so we can't compost those. But in your backyard, you can obviously always do what you want to. So, but yeah, anything that comes from the earth, you can put back into it. And we can go on to the next one. Perfect. And what shouldn't you compost? To create your best quality compost and to avoid pests and odors, you don't want to compost meat or bones. Those usually will just attract pests, and they decompose in strangely. Large quantities of oil, because it hinders the decomposition process. Obviously, plastics are not going to compost very well. Coated or heavily colored cardboard, paper, and paperboard. So like if you think of like a freezer box, that is usually coated in wax and can't be composted very well. Dairy products, because again, A, it attracts pests, and B, the smell is absolutely horrible. If you've ever had like a spoiled gallon of milk, it's so bad. And then you don't want to put in poison or diseased plants, because if you're thinking about it, you're going to be putting this compost back into the soil. You don't want to put poison or disease into your soil when you compost. All right, let's rot. So these are a couple of different types of composting systems that you could potentially put into your home or your community. We have all of these in on our campus or near our campus. So the first one that we have is an aerated static pile or pit. This creates finished compost in about 3 to 6 months. The one we have pictured here is a 3-bin system. You only see 2 of the bins, but the way it works is that you mixing your greens and your browns, you kind of layer them on top of each other. And then, so the 2 to 1 part browns versus greens. And then what we do is we take a watering can and we water it about twice a week. And then we use the man in the green shirt is holding what's called an auger. And it's just a post hole digger with an auger bit. And what that does is it aerates the pile. So it brings the food scraps at the bottom, it brings it up towards the top to kind of move around that pile. And then it also adds air to it. So the 3 big things in composting are water, air, and obviously the food scraps and time. So again, this creates compost in about 3 to 6 months. The next type of composting is vermicomposting, which is actually my favorite type of composting, and it uses worms to compost. So the way that vermicomposting works is that you create a system. Some systems are in ground, some systems are like just, you can take just like basically a bucket and put all your worms in it. And then you'll put a substrate in like coconut coir or anything like that. And then you'll add in your worms, and then periodically you'll add in some food scraps. And in about 3 to 6 months, those worms will do all of the work for you and turn it into finished compost, also called castings. And then you'll take those castings, you'll dilute them, and then you can put them into your plants or into your garden. All right, and we can move on to the next slide. Perfect. Another type of compost system is a tumbler or an enclosed system. So there's a lot of different types of these. You can create your own tumbler systems. There's a lot of online tutorials, or you can buy one. The one we have pictured here, we have a child turning, so it's a great way to get in some labor. And so what happens is with these tumbler systems, most of the time they're dual barrel. So you'll add all of your browns and your greens into one side, and then periodically you'll add some water to it. And then every other day or every day, you'll just go in for like 10 minutes and turn it, and it will add in that aeration. So it'll mix up the browns and the greens and add in the water and everything like that. And then most of them, the way it works is that as the compost gets finished, it will actually sift it into the second barrel, and then you'll have finished compost in about a month. So it's a little bit faster, but it's a little bit more work in the front end. And usually you can't have as big of a capacity with these. And then the last type is manufactured bins. These work almost exactly the same way as aerated static piles. The only difference is that it's like pretty self-contained. So most of the time you'll just kind of stack up, add in those browns and those greens in a 2-to-1 ratio, add in some water, and then you'll shake it sometimes. And then it'll, all of the sifted finished compost will collect in the bottom in like a tray. You'll pull it out. Again, with the same thing with the tumblers and enclosed systems, it's not as big of a capacity, but it finishes in about 2 months, and it's pretty easy. It's pretty self-explanatory. It comes with an instruction manual. So it really just depends on what kind of compost system you're looking into. And with that, we can go into some food for thought. So before creating a compost system, you really want to ask yourself, how much waste do I throw away? So we use an aerated static pile most of the time because you can get a lot of waste in with a little amount of time. So we have a program that we use our aerated static pile for, where people from our community actually bring us their food scraps, and then we process them in that aerated static pile, and then we give that compost back to them. So we process a lot of food scraps. That's why we have that aerated static pile. But if you're just doing it in your home, or if you're doing it for your school or for maybe like a class of yours, then you don't need that big of a system. You could go with like a manufacturing system or a tumbler system. Secondly, do you want your bin to be tidy and easy to get to? So with those manufactured bins and the tumbler bins, it's all self-contained. It doesn't really make a big mess. Whereas like with an aerated static pile, we have to, as you can see in this photo, we have to get in there and down and dirty. We have to stand on top of the bins and actually auger it ourselves. And then with vermicomposting, you periodically have to, deal with worms. So maybe if you don't like bugs, you probably shouldn't work with a vermicomposting system. The next food for thought is, will it be the right size for my needs? So the same thing with how much waste do I throw away? You want to consider, like, if you're not producing a ton of waste, maybe you don't want to do a big bin system. The next one is it easy to maintain the system with my current resources? If you don't have access to make your own big bin system with an aerated static pile, maybe you should go for a smaller self-contained system. Or maybe you don't have the capacity to turn a bin or to turn a tumbler every day, and it'd be better to go with a vermicomposting system that you don't really have to watch over as much. The next thing is, does the bin have lid and air vents? Do you have, maybe, are you worried about getting rodents or pests? Is this going to be next to your school or next to your house? Ours is in a garden, so we don't really mind getting mice and lizards and things like that in our compost bin. The next question, or the next thing to think about is, can I easily remove the finished compost? Is it pre-sifted for me, like in a tumbler system, and I just have to kind of grab it out and put it where I need to? Or do I actually have to go in and sift it and process it and things like that? And the last thing to think about is, do you have a specific timeline for when you want it to be finished? So vermicomposting and aerated static piles, they finish compost in about 3 to 6 months. If you need it sooner than that, then maybe you should go with a tumbler system where it finishes in about a month, or a manufactured system where it finishes in about 2 to 3 months. So those are just some things to think about, just so you can get the best experience with composting, and you can figure out the best compost system for you or your community. Right, and we can move on. Perfect. And then that's all that I have. If you have any more questions or you'd like to know more about composting, there is our website and our email, and also our Instagram. So thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Sydney. Great presentation. Lots of knowledge to share about composting. Hope you all are inspired to start composting yourself. So just a reminder, any questions you have for Sydney, post in the chat or save for the end, and we'll take questions at the end. I'm going to stop sharing this, but if you wanted to share any of your contact information in the chat, that would be great. All right, and next up we have Young. Young, I'm going to.
Should I take it away?
Yeah, if you're ready.
I'm ready.
All right.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Young. I use they, them pronouns, and I work for the Post Landfill Action Network. I'm not a current college student. I graduated from the University of Pittsburgh in 2019, and most of my background in organizing at Pitt was actually in climate change work. And so I started kind of in divestment, if you know about divestment from fossil fuels. So that movement calls on universities to take their money, move it out of the current investments in fossil fuels, which they get, which they put their endowment into, and so they're profiting off of climate change. But while I was in that movement, living in Pittsburgh and always being from Pittsburgh, a Shell cracker plant it's called a petrochemical cracker plant, began construction just north of Pittsburgh in Beaver County. If you're unfamiliar with petrochemical plants, it's kind of the merger in between the zero waste and the climate change world. So that's how I came to the zero waste world. So a cracker plant cracks methane. That's why it's called a cracker. It doesn't make like Nabisco or like water crackers. It cracks methane and turns them into little plastic pellets, which are called nurdles. Some of you might find them on beaches. And then the nurdles are what is given to a manufacturer to melt down and turn into your plastic water bottle that you may be using. And so I came into the zero waste world with a lot of understanding that zero waste is also a climate change issue, right? Because we are fracking to make these single-use plastics, and in the facility that's going in north of Pittsburgh is 70% going to make single-use plastics. And we don't need those, right? Like there's no reason for that. There's like a general global shift with all oil and gas companies right now in that direction that I'm talking about, right? So plastic has become kind of the #1 climate change issue, because as demonstrated in the fact that like we would all here choose a more efficient car. Maybe this is a little bit of a biased population, but most younger generations just understand that it's better to save energy than to overuse energy, and that is a victory of the climate change movement. The fact that we think that way. And oil and gas was afraid when this started happening, right? They're in trouble. And a lot of them see plastic as their saving grace, because if they can have us rely on single-use plastic, then we will continue to be able. They'll continue to be able to sell it to us and profit off of that extraction. That extraction is ruining my home. So the biggest like most notable cracker plant and kind of cracker plant region, petrochemical region, is in Cancer Alley in Louisiana. And this is one of the starkest examples of environmental racism. I encourage you to look up and hear about Sharon Levine, who just won the Goldwater Prize for environmental activism. Rice St. James resists there. But the petrochemical hub that is built in Cancer Alley is attempting to be replicated here where I live in the Ohio River Valley. And that is because of our proximity to Marcellus Shale and natural gas. So that cracker plant was kind of the first sign for folks in my region to see that zero waste was going to become an essential issue that we have to organize on. Fast forward to me graduating college, and I started working for the Post Landfill Action Network in plastics. So I primarily advise students on organizing on their campuses to eliminate single-use plastic. Plan in general, though, we are a 8-year-old nonprofit. We were founded by college students that had just graduated from the University of New Hampshire, who had made the first like self-sustaining move-out program. So if you think about the program on your campus, maybe you have one, maybe you don't, where you collect items, gently used items at the end and like resell them at the beginning of the next semester. Plan was founded on the Trash to Treasure program at the University of New Hampshire, but now we do so much more than move-out programs. We do campaigning on plastics. We have a campus-wide assessment of waste systems. We have a bunch of manuals and trainings. We do expanded recycling, compost. We have manuals. We have a manual that we made with the U.S. Compost Council that you can find on our website. And basically, there's a staff of 11 other people, 10 other people like me. And we advise schools and students on best practices in zero waste. So instead of students having to run into the same issue over and over and always find the solution on their own, we can give them solutions that other campuses have used. I specifically work in the plastics realm kind of because of my background, and we've had a lot of success. So I organize primarily around something we call the Break Free from Plastic Campus Pledge, which the UC system signed on to. I know UC also talked on this panel. So that pledge is a systematic way to eliminate waste, and it was Plan's response to a lot of schools banning plastic in the form of only getting rid of straws. And we all here know that's not enough. Plastic shows up in so many different ways. They like plastic wrap bananas and apples. They put food in clamshells to go. We have silverware. And so our pledge, which you can find on our website, I'll drop a link when I'm done, systematically goes through and puts all of the pieces in place that you really need to be plastic free. So that means creating a compost system like Sydney was just talking about, and also creating like a reusable system so that your campus isn't using single-use plastic for to-go items. So it's really fun. If you're interested in campaigning on plastic on your campus, you should definitely come make a meeting with me. I'm going to drop a link to do that. But the first step, you can make a meeting with me, but you should also come to a similar conference that we run called the Students for Zero Waste Conference. We're going to have a panel there about specifically plastics campaigning on college campuses. And I will drop a link to that as well. But that's my elevator pitch. So I'll throw it back to you, Caleb.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Young. I really appreciate the work that you and Plan are doing. And thanks for sharing that all with me. Seems like a great affiliation with the Zero Waste Youth. And I'm sure all the organizations and folks here. So thanks for that presentation. So yeah, now I'd like to open it up to questions. Yeah, feel free to write any questions that you might have in the chat, or if you feel like it's easier to offer your question and you just want to say it, raise your hand and I can call on you as well. We have a couple questions to get started here. One question for Sydney was, do you think that commercial composting is similar to commercial recycling or like recycling programs, and that we're collectively doing a lot of wishful composting?
So we actually, the Compost Cats, we have a partnership with the city of Tucson, where we were able to open up a commercial recycling facility for one of our programs called the Food Cycle Program, which takes like local businesses compost. And I think it's mostly, I don't think it's wishful thinking as much because composting is a lot easier than recycling in terms of like a lot of people know like what you can and can't compost. Like there's very clear defined rules across the board. Whereas like with recycling, it differs from city to city a lot of the time. And I think it just is a lot about education where you have to make sure that the businesses know. So like we go in and train them like a lot of the time, and we actually go in and audit them every month.
Hmm.
So I think it's just making sure that you prepare beforehand, like how you're going to do it and what you're going to do to make sure that you're keeping your compost free from contamination. So
Great. Thanks. Good. Nice work on that program, the local program. I think that's a big part, is keeping these programs localized, and then everyone, the community is educating each other. So, all right, this next question is for Maddie and Kyle. Are there other research projects that are in the works because of the work you are all doing or have done?
That is a good question. Yeah, so actually SAR is hosted every year, and it's hosted during the winter and spring quarters. As a current co-director of SAR, I'm in the process of creating several different teams to tackle several different areas of sustainability on campus. And one of the teams is a zero waste team who will once again be partnering with the zero waste manager, Kiki Wong, at UCLA to be tackling contamination issues in different buildings. So we will be like presenting last year's research to this new team, so they can like decide specifically where they want to tackle contamination in these buildings. But yeah, so we are building off of the research we completed last year, relatively soon with a new team. And then yeah, I'll let Kyle speak to anything more too.
I just wanted to chime in about, there was actually research done before this research project on a similar thing, although it was for the UCLA's Theater and Film School. I was also part of that one, and it was really great, more on just specifically working with a very particular part of campus that sustainability doesn't usually reach out to. And we were able to make a green productions guide for this school, just on how to really make their theater and film productions a lot more sustainable. And I think it's really important for people within our field in zero waste to really be reaching out to people who otherwise wouldn't really be kind of in the circle or in the know of zero waste, just because it's almost like they have the most potential to do good, or for us to do good. Because I think we went over there and some of the first questions were like, what can we put in recycling? And we were like, oh no. So this is going to be interesting. But it ended up being a really important project. And I think now wherever the new research team goes, they have other previous research to sort of build off on. And I did just put in the link to our work in the chat. So if you want to check it out, it's all there.
Great, thank you. Yeah, sometimes it seems like just getting back to the basics is really the best place to start. Great. So this next question we have is for Young. Yeah, is there any grant or funding for schools and orgs to implement some of these solutions that you all offer? Maybe educating ambassadors to represent at their organizations or schools?
Man, funding is a tough question. So we do advise on funding, and one of the first things that I tell students is to check their campus. So student governments tend to have a lot of funding, but if you're not in a space where you have a student government, there are lots of other spaces to get this. So one of our partner organizations, Algalita, recently gave out scholarships for anyone working on plastic pollution, kind of completely unrestricted. So if you needed a car to drive to a cleanup, they were accepting applications for that, and they're going to be doing that again. It's called the Stay Stoked Award. So definitely check that out. And then I'd also say like stay, we like occasionally offer opportunities for funding. So right now we're running anybody who completes a campus brand audit, which is a waste audit except you record the brands like Coke and Pepsi, is entered for a raffle for $500 to do whatever they want on their campus. Pretty unrestricted funding. So there's lots of opportunities out there, and I'd say the best advice I can give you will be one-on-one. So we can chat for sure. But yeah, funding is tough.
Great. Thanks for sharing. All right, I have another question here for Sydney. Bonnie was wondering, which compost system type do you recommend for cold weather climates?
For colder weather climates where it can get where like the compost can freeze, because one of the things about compost is that it heats up a lot. We actually surveyed with the University of Chicago at Loyola, and they use an aerated static pile composting, so the same type we use, but instead of putting it in like a brick bin system, they just have it in like a giant compost heap basically, and they just get in there and turn it every week. So I think most systems will work well, except for vermicomposting, because worms are sensitive sometimes. So you could use any of them, but I'd probably recommend an aerated sag pile, especially because if you can get that big heap, then the internal temperature doesn't fluctuate as much in the composting process.
Okay. I like the tip of using the auger too. I hadn't seen that one before. I done a lot of flipping by hand, and that's a lot of work for sure. Great. Yeah, anyone in the audience wanna ask a question? You're welcome to unmute yourself. We got about 2 minutes left before we switch over to our raffle. Panelists, any last comments or things you want to share with the group? Well, I really appreciate you all for your presentations. A lot of great knowledge shared. I hope everyone is inspired and yeah, connects up with some of these organizations, or just feel, is inspired to do some of their own surveys in their organizations, start their own composting practices, or yeah, connects up with these organizations and spreads the work, because this is really important stuff. And yeah, we're not reinventing the wheel. The solutions are out there, so we just need to educate ourselves and spread the information. So appreciate you all for the work that you're doing. Thanks for presenting. And yeah, please stay around our raffle. We have some great prizes for everyone. It's going to be hosted in the main hall, so meet us over there at 3 o'clock and enter for your chance to win some great prizes. And also just want to put another pitch in for Zero Waste Youth. If you're inspired by what you see here today and want to be a part of the organization and planning for events throughout the year for next year's Convergence, please consider joining the team. Yeah, we'd love to have all the support we can get. It's really a great group of people, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, Bonnie just put a link to just sharing your information with the team in the chat. So please check that out and sign up and join a planning committee meeting. We'd love to have you all. All right, well, if there's no other comments or questions, then let's all move over to the main hall and get ready for the raffle.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, everyone. It was great talking with you.
Yeah, thank you.